Good evening and welcome to Gravitas at Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. There's a lot of buzz in New Delhi. The Dalai Lama is visiting. This is his first visit in 3 years, but this is not his first visit ever to New Delhi. And yet it could be one of the most defining ones. Why do I say that? Just consider the recent events. The US and Indian forces are conducting drills. They're happening near the Chinese border. Beijing is not happy about any of this. It has sent a message to New Delhi warning against the involvement of what it calls third parties in the border dispute. But India is going ahead anyway. There is a growing focus on the Tibetan cause. Some Indian lawmakers have come up with a proposal. They want the Dalai Lama to be conferred with India's highest civilian honor, the Bharat Ratna. The speculation is growing. Could there be a meeting between the Dalai Lama and the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi? He's never met him in the time that he's been India's Prime Minister. Is India rethinking its Tibet policy now? This is our cover story tonight. Any comic fan will tell you this: to take on Superman, you need kryptonite. You need something to level the playing field. And geopolitics is no different. But in our story, there is no heroic Superman. There is only a villainous superpower. I'm talking about China. Militarily, China is far stronger than any Asian country. Financially, their checkbook is unmatched. So countries like India need something to level the field. They need a kryptonite. Enter the Dalai Lama. Nothing enrages China more than the Dalai Lama. For most of the world, he is a Buddhist spiritual leader, a beacon of peace and freedom. But for China, he's a wolf in sheep's clothing. That's how the Chinese government once described him, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Earlier today, the Dalai Lama landed in New Delhi. His motorcade attracted a lot of attention. There was a lot of buzz in the city. The question is why? One reason is the timing. This is the Dalai Lama's first visit to New Delhi in 3 years, so clearly there must be a plan. Which brings us to reason number 2. New Delhi is the seat of power in India. It is home to India's political leadership. So could the Dalai Lama be planning to meet them? Quick side note. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has not met the Dalai Lama since taking office. He's spoken on the phone, but no direct meeting yet. As of now, there's no word on whether it will happen this time, but the mere possibility is important. India's relationship with the Dalai Lama has changed over the years. In 1959, the Dalai Lama crossed over to India. He was fleeing the Chinese army then. The Indian government decided to give him asylum. Back then, Jawaharlal Nehru was Prime Minister of India. Nehru never wanted to leverage the Tibet issue. He wanted to be friends with China. In fact, he asked the Dalai Lama to not provoke Beijing. So the asylum was more humanitarian than political. But 60 years later, things have changed. The Indian government may not admit it, but the Dalai Lama's presence in India is deeply political. More than 100,000 Tibetans live and work in India. They've also set up a government in exile at Dharamshala. Needless to say, China hates all of this. They've repeatedly asked India to shut down the Tibetan government, but India still hasn't. So this visit by the Dalai Lama should not be seen in isolation. It must be seen in the broader context. A, the border tensions between India and China, they're yet to be resolved. Earlier this week, Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar talked about the Galwan clashes. He said the episode is still casting a shadow over relations. B, the showdown over Taiwan. Nancy Pelosi's visit may have been uncalled for, but it was certainly bad PR for China. Their warnings were openly ignored. Their claims of sovereignty were effectively dismissed. So it's a sensitive time for Beijing. And see, the state of the Tibetan movement. The Dalai Lama, you see, is 87 years old. So naturally, there are questions about his succession. Who will lead the Tibetan movement forward? What will the new leadership look like? All these questions will have to be answered. If not, Tibet could be forgotten. Because let's face it, that's how the world works. Last year, all the talk was about Xinjiang, about the Uyghurs in labor camps. And now everyone is talking about Taiwan. So to stay relevant, the Tibetan movement must be defined, which means India must also review its Tibet policy. Is it still humanitarian or is it political? So far, India's policy has been a mix. Last month, the Dalai Lama embarked on a trip to Ladakh. He stayed there for nearly a month. Now, Ladakh shares historical and cultural ties with Tibet. It also shares a border with China. During this trip, the Dalai Lama hitched a ride with the Indian Air Force. He was airlifted to a remote village in Ladakh. In fact, the Defence Ministry of India posted this picture on social media, these pictures. And here's what the tweet said. His Holiness showered his blessings on all air warriors of the station. And I know this sounds like a benign move, an airlift for an aging leader, that's all it is. But China won't see it that way. Anything that involves the Dalai Lama is political for Beijing, even wishing him on his birthday. India's Prime Minister has greeted the Dalai Lama twice, once in 2021 and then again in 2022, basically after the Galwan clashes. The Prime Minister started wishing the Dalai Lama a happy birthday. And both these times, China criticized it. It said that India does not understand the Dalai Lama's separatist nature. But do you know what would really infuriate them? A Bharat Ratna. It is the highest civilian award conferred by India. A group of MPs, members of parliament, want the Dalai Lama to get the Bharat Ratna. 22 lawmakers are part of this push. Some of them belong to the ruling party of India, the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP. But so far, the government is silent on this. If the Dalai Lama does get a Bharat Ratna, China would blow a fuse. Bilateral ties could hit rock bottom. It would also signal a change in India's Tibet policy from humanitarian to clearly political. The question is, does India want to risk that? Officially, India recognizes Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. There is no debate about that. Even the Dalai Lama has accepted this. In Ladakh, he said Tibet was seeking autonomy, not independence. But what about the next generation of Tibetans? The people who've grown up in India, they have enjoyed freedom and democracy. Will they be happy with just autonomy? Also, what about the succession? The Dalai Lama has dropped multiple hints about his successor. He said it could be a woman. He said it could be chosen from a free country. So not China, definitely. But Beijing has other plans. They want the succession to follow Chinese communist laws, which is strange for an atheist state, but that's China for you. Convenience over principles, always. My point is the Tibetan movement is undergoing major changes, and so is India's China policy. It benefits both sides to synchronize those changes, to be on the same page. But India must also remember the balance of power, the cost-benefit equation of backing Tibet. Because the last thing they need is the kryptonite to backfire. That news broadcast was from the year 1945. It was a moment in history that changed Japan forever. From a country with one of the most powerful militaries, Japan became a pacifist nation. It surrendered to the Allied powers. More than 70 years have passed, and Japan is once again at a turning point. It faces military threats from all directions. China's recent moves around Taiwan have put the region on the edge. Beijing is swiftly militarizing the Indo-Pacific, and Japan no longer can afford to ignore the growing threats. It's about to make a big move. Japan wants to arm itself in a way that will eventually mean abandoning pacificism. Japan is ready to rise as a military power. It is set to become one of the biggest military spenders in the world. And this is a country that says it does not have an army, just a self-defense force. We have some numbers for you. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has come up with a defense budget. This is for the year 2023. Next year, Japan will spend $39.5 billion on defense, and this is already a record high, but Tokyo is not done. In the next 5 years, it wants to double its defense budget from almost $40 billion to $79 billion. What would this mean? The move will fundamentally change how the world views Japan, from a pacifist country to a military power. Let me explain how. Japan ranks 9th today in military spending. Where will it be when it starts spending almost $80 billion? Japan could move to the 3rd spot, just behind the US and China. As of today, the US spends $801 billion. This was their budget in 2021. $801 billion in defense. China spent $293 billion. India ranked 3rd with a budget of $76.6 billion. So Japan's projected budget in 2028 will surpass India's military spending of today. Of course, these numbers may not hold because military budgets of all of these countries have been expanding every year. So Japan's projected ranking could change, but it's safe to say it will be among the top countries. It plans to acquire more weapons, new military hardware purchases that can deter the enemy. Reports say Japan's defense minister has made a procurement list. This is what they're looking to buy. Improved missiles and radar systems. This includes systems for hypersonic missiles. These are weapons that can travel faster than the speed of sound. There is also a plan to expand the missile arsenal. Japan wants about 1,000 missiles which can be fired from ships and planes. Next weapon on the list is unmanned aerial combat drones. Every major military force has these now. They can take down targets without risking human lives. Tokyo also wants to get next-generation fighter jets. It is co-developing a jet with London. So future budgets will account for this project too. And by the time all the purchases are done, Japan could have some serious firepower at its disposal. The weapons will obviously go to Japan's self-defense forces. It has over 200,000 personnel. They call themselves the self-defense forces, not the army. Why do they need to feel the need to arm themselves better? It's because of recent events, specifically 3 events. They led to serious concern and forced a shift in Tokyo. Event number 1, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Number 2, China's latest provocations against Taiwan. And 3, North Korea's growing nuclear missile tests. Russia, China, North Korea. Do you know what's common in these countries? All of them have territorial disputes with Japan. With Russia, Tokyo is fighting over the Kuril Islands. It's been going on for 77 years now. In Japan, it is better known as the Northern Territories Dispute. The Kuril is a chain of 4 islands. Both Japan and Russia stake claim to them. Then we have China. Japan and China have an outstanding dispute in the East China Sea. This is about the Senkaku Islands. Right now, Japan controls them, but China stakes claim and calls them the Diaoyu Islands. With North Korea, Japan is fighting over the Liangcourt Rocks. These are small islands. They lie between Japan and the 2 Koreas. So Tokyo has a territorial dispute with almost every neighbor. There is no peaceful resolution in sight. There's an atmosphere of fear. People in Japan back bigger military budgets. In the month of May this year, the results of a survey came out. Japanese people were asked if the country should bolster its defense. More than 60% of them backed the idea. So the government has given the green signal to spend on arms. But what happens to Japan's pacifist credentials? Will Tokyo finally dump the no war clause in its constitution? Well, that too could happen. Fumio Kishida has a super majority in Japan's parliament. The Prime Minister has vowed to follow in the footsteps of the late Shinzo Abe, the leader who first pitched the idea of changing Japan's constitution. So the amendment is only a matter of time, perhaps even a necessity now, thanks to all the aggression and expansionism that China is displaying in the neighborhood. And speaking of military expansion, it's time for a story. Have you heard about the man who saved the world? I know it sounds dramatic, but wait till you hear the full story. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces. In the year 1983, he prevented a nuclear apocalypse. At that time, Petrov was working on the early warning system, sort of like a radar. It would tell you if nuclear missiles were launched anywhere in the world. On September 26, something unusual happened. The radar picked up 6 missiles fired by the United States. All of them were heading for the Soviet Union. Now, the protocol was clear. The Soviet military should have responded with nuclear strikes of its own. But Petrov never informed his superiors. He saw the warning for what it really was, a false alarm. How many lives do you think he saved on that day? Perhaps millions. But the moral of the story is not courage or good judgment. The moral is things go wrong. Even the best military technology can malfunction. Even the sharpest, well-trained soldiers can make mistakes. And if they do, there can be real consequences. India experienced something similar recently. In March this year, a BrahMos missile from India landed on Pakistani territory. It was a misfire. Thankfully, there was no warhead on the missile, so no explosion. But think about how deadly it could have been. We are talking about a supersonic missile. It flew 100 kilometers into Pakistani airspace. It was flying at an altitude of 40,000 feet, and that too at 3 times the speed of sound. What if Pakistan had responded? You know how trigger-happy their army can be. What if they fired missiles of their own? 2 nuclear-armed neighbors could have been at war. So naturally, India investigated this incident. At the time, it was called a technical malfunction. But the probe seems to have revealed some human error as well. 3 Air Force officers have been held responsible for the misfire. All 3 have been fired from service. Their mistake? Deviating from the standard operating procedure, what we call SOP. Standard operating procedure. You see, every military installation has a set of rules. You have checks, you have double checks, even triple checks when it comes to lethal weapons. But these 3 officers deviated from those rules, and in the process, they nearly triggered a war. How is Pakistan responding to these findings, like you would expect them to? They've rejected the investigation report. They're proposing a joint probe instead. But let's not get carried away with Pakistan's reaction. This is a country that uses nuclear weapons to bargain for financial aid, not exactly an expert on weapons safety. Instead, let's focus on what the takeaways are for India. We are the 3rd highest military spender in the world. Total budget is more than $76 billion. India has also developed 160 nuclear warheads. They can be launched from land, air and sea. And that makes India one of the 4 nuclear triad powers. The others are Russia, China and the US. Now, having an impressive military stockpile is good, especially if you have neighbors like Pakistan and China, but that also comes with a lot of responsibility. Your officers must be vigilant 24/7. They must have excellent judgment and response skills. Your technology must be updated and your operating procedures must be airtight. I know it's like preaching to the choir. The army already knows all of this. And so far, their track record is stellar. But that's the thing about accidents and misfires like this one. They don't have to happen repeatedly. One time is enough to create lasting damage. So what is the solution? For starters, modernization. If technology is the problem, it can also be the solution. Every nuclear power in the world is upgrading and modernizing its arsenal. It's very expensive work. The US has set aside $634 billion to modernize their nukes. $634 billion over 10 years. Now, India's arsenal is much smaller, just 1/10 the size of America's. But the work still must be done. Here in India, almost 50% of the military budget goes to wages and pensions, a good chunk to procurement, another good chunk to research and development. What does that leave for maintenance and safety? It's like buying a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. Maintenance is equally expensive. The good thing is, this accident was acknowledged and investigated by India. There was no effort to brush it under the carpet. And knowing our defense forces, they will make sure this misfire was a one-off. Our next story is from Europe. Its energy crisis is getting worse by the day. Electricity bills are soaring, gas reserves are depleting, and winter is coming. As the mercury dips, gas and oil consumption is going to pick up. But Europe does not have enough supplies. Russia is withholding them to gain an edge. So what is Europe doing to stave off the crisis? It is slashing energy consumption. Germany has switched off street lights. France has banned illuminated billboards. Italy has extended the life of coal power plants. Spain has limited air conditioning at airports. Here's a report.
These images are from Berlin, the capital of Germany. Once illuminated with spotlights, today it's a desolate spectacle. The lights have been dimmed. The monuments have gone dark. This is Berlin trying to stave off the energy crisis, escape the troubling reality of depleting reserves. Before the war was started, 55% of Germany's energy supplies came from Russia. As of June 2022, the supplies had been reduced to a meager 26%. As winter approaches and the war intensifies, the supplies are expected to fall further. And Germany is yet to find a concrete alternative. So, to survive the dip in mercury and hold on to its gas reserves, Germany is undertaking a raft of measures. They include a ban on heating private swimming pools, a ban on heating at some public buildings, lowering the minimum office temperature to 19 degrees Celsius, and switching off most streetlights. Same story in France. Declining gas supplies from Russia have led to a colossal spike in energy bills. The French government has unveiled a series of initiatives to tackle this. By October this year, French supermarkets will switch off illuminated billboards. Retail spaces will reduce lighting by 30%, and shops will lower temperatures to 17 degrees Celsius. In Italy, where elections are due in September, the authorities are treading carefully. Their energy savings plan includes steps like extending the life of coal plants, temporarily halting work at factories, and shortening heating hours at workplaces. In Spain, which is not as dependent on Russian energy supplies, the reserves are being safeguarded in case the war spills over. How are they doing this? By limiting air conditioning at airports and train stations, requiring shop doors to be closed when the AC is on, switching off lights on shop windows at night, and limiting heating at schools and hospitals. These 4 countries are not alone. They're joined by several others in reducing energy consumption, like Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Austria, and Greece. All these countries have either lowered indoor temperatures, mandated the use of public transport, asked offices to lower thermostats, or dimmed lights to avoid blackouts. The measures have so far been uneven, but the urgency is growing as prices rise. By the time the winter arrives, they plan to cut gas consumption by 15%. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
We keep talking about inflation, about how everything is getting more expensive. Do you know why? Because it's so obvious. You can see inflation on the price tag, which is why companies have devised a workaround. It's called Shrinkflation. We've told you about this in the past. The principle is really simple. Instead of charging more, you give less of the product. Let me explain how this works. This picture shows 2 bars of soap. The first one weighs 100 grams, the second one weighs 90 grams, but the price is the same. The first one has been phased out by the company. Now they sell only the second one, the 90-gram one. Now I know what you're thinking. What good is 10 grams? What could the company possibly save? Well, that's where scale comes in. Companies sell millions of units every year. Imagine cutting 10 grams of millions of bars of soap. It would add up to a lot of savings. Every company practices shrinkflation, one way or the other. But now consumers are noticing it. They're calling out such companies. Take a look at one such customer.
These two granola bars are the exact same product. Do you see the difference? This bar was bought 1 week ago and has 26 grams. It is usually around $1.50 on sale or $1.90 normally. This bar was bought today. It has 24 grams and was well over $2. What it does have is more air. We are now paying more money for less product. This is also a friendly reminder that Quaker Oats is owned by PepsiCo.
Let me recap that for you. The old bar weighed around 26 grams. It cost $1.9. The new one weighs only 24 grams. It costs more than $2. That is shrinkflation. You're either paying the same or more for lesser quantity. But why do companies do it? Because they too are facing inflation. The cost of raw material is going up. The cost of electricity is going up. So are wages and salaries. So companies try to cut corners. They try to squeeze more money from the same output. That's where shrinkflation comes in. Technically, there's nothing illegal about it. The packets still mention the weight. They also display the price of the commodity. So everything is by the book. Having said that, you still feel cheated, especially during an economic slump. In normal times, you see, most people in fact, don't notice shrinkflation. There are two reasons for that. Number one is clever packaging. Let me show you 2 bottles of Gatorade. Which one looks bigger? The one on the right certainly looks taller. So the assumption is you get more Gatorade. Well, wrong. The one on the right is the new one. It has around 4 ounces less. Now, we usually dismiss such changes as marketing campaigns. But in reality, it is shrinkflation. The second reason is our shopping habits. All of us check out the price tag. But how many of us check out the quantity or weight? Very few. And companies are betting on that shopping habit. $1 or $2 extra does not affect our overall budget. Then why is shrinkflation blowing up now? Again, 2 reasons. One is the economic slump. People are already suffering under high inflation. They're paying more for food and fuel. So naturally, they're more vigilant. They check out both price and quantity. Another reason is social media. Earlier, too, people spotted shrinkflation, but they had no way to tell the world. With social media, that's not the case anymore. One video on TikTok, one post on Twitter, that's all it takes to expose these companies. Videos related to shrinkflation have gotten 261 million views on TikTok. Hashtag shrinkflation is trending on Instagram and Twitter. Last month, there was an interesting report. Apparently, customers are calling out shrinkflation at restaurants. How? By leaving Yelp reviews. They claim their food portions are getting smaller. The problem is, complaining is unlikely to change things. Just think about it. Would you stop buying a pack of chips because it has 10 grams less? Or a drink because it has 4 ounces less? Chances are no, you won't. Most experts talk about working around shrinkflation, like buying in bulk or opting for unbranded products or keeping a close eye on prices and quantities. You can compare other products and pick the best one. Once the inflation cools down, things should return to normal. Our chips and drinks should get bigger, but that's where corporate greed comes in. Knowing these companies, we can predict their playbook. Spread the burden, accumulate the profits. Our next story is from Nepal. It's in the grip of another political crisis. The country's rulers are clashing over a law. A citizenship amendment bill. A provision in this bill allows foreign women married to Nepalese citizens the right to acquire citizenship immediately. The government supports this provision, but the president does not. 2 weeks back, she refused to formalize the bill. Here's what happened next.
Nepal is in the grip of another political crisis. A tussle between the country's rulers. On one side is the president, a constitutional post with no executive powers. On the other side is the government, the Prime Minister along with his cabinet. Caught between them is the legislature, lawmakers in the House of Representatives. What is this tussle all about? A citizenship amendment bill. It was passed on the 14th of July after 2 long years of discussions. The aim was to alter Nepal's citizenship laws, but certain provisions of this bill have sparked controversy. Chief among them is a citizenship provision for foreign women. This bill grants them the right to acquire citizenship immediately after marrying a Nepalese citizen. This provision has become a bone of contention. The government, led by Sharma is all for it. But the president, Bidya Devi Bhandari, doesn't approve of it. On the 16th of August, she sent the bill back to Nepal's lower house, along with a list of changes and suggestions. She asked lawmakers to reconsider the bill. The government refused to comply. On the 18th of August, the lower house held another vote. A total of 195 lawmakers were present. 135 endorsed the bill. 60 voted against it. So the bill was sent back to the president, without any changes she had suggested. Why? Because the government feels the president is doing the opposition's bidding, that her actions are politically motivated in favor of her own party, led by Nepal's former Prime Minister KP Sharma Ali. So what happens next? The president has 15 days to sign the bill, failing which she may face executive heat. Disappointed at the government's actions, Bidya Devi Bhandari is exploring her choices. She is consulting legal experts, journalists, civil society members, even retired army generals. No one knows what exactly she intends to do as far as the citizenship provision is concerned. It has been a matter of intense debate for years. There are about 600,000 people awaiting citizenship in Nepal. A lot of them happen to be women, mostly from the Indian states bordering Nepal. They're having a tough time due to Nepal's stringent laws. They cannot open a bank account, get a driver's license, apply for a job, start a business, even acquire a SIM card on their name. On the other hand, Nepalese women married to Indian citizens get the same rights and more immediately. The government of Nepal wants to end this. But politics is not letting this happen.
Now, China's strategy / bullying in the Pacific seems to be paying dividends, at least for now. The Solomon Islands has handed them a diplomatic victory. Let me tell you how. A U.S. Coast Guard ship was patrolling the southern Pacific. The vessel was called Oliver Henry. It was on the lookout for illegal fishing missions. During the voyage, the ship wanted to dock in the Solomons. It wanted to refuel at the port. Just one problem. The Solomon Islands did not respond. They did not give permission to the U.S. ship. It was diverted to Papua New Guinea instead. Now, we don't know why this request was ignored. Neither the Solomons government nor the US has given a reason. But our guess is China. You see, such patrol missions are common in the Pacific. They're jointly carried out by the US, France, Australia and New Zealand. During such patrols, port calls are normal. The US had scheduled this particular stop in the Solomon Islands, but their government had other plans. Clearly, there's a foreign hand at play. Earlier this year, the islands had become a key battleground between the West and China. You may remember that controversy. China wanted to sign a security pact with Solomon Islands, but the US opposed it. They threatened action if such a deal was signed. The pressure did not work. China did secure a draft deal. It permits the PLA to dock and replenish at Solomon ports. It also permits China to deploy troops in case of social unrest. And this was a big pivot for this tiny island. Historically, it has been closer to the West. Until 2019, the Solomon Islands recognized Taiwan as the real China. So what explains the shift? Their Prime Minister, Manasseh Sogavare. He's considered very close to the Chinese regime. You could also say he's on their payroll. Take a look at this report. In 2021, China gave the Prime Minister's office $2.5 million. What was this money for? That China did not say. The Prime Minister could use his discretion. And guess what he used this money for? To pay lawmakers. 39 out of 50 lawmakers received 2 payments last year. Reports say they were political payments. The Prime Minister's shift to China has attracted a lot of domestic criticism. There were anti-government protests earlier this year. So what does he do? Buy off the politicians. Australia's ABC News was making a documentary on this, on the growing Chinese influence on Solomon Islands. They got interviews. They dug out the numbers, so guess what the Prime Minister did? He took a leaf out of China's playbook. He threatened to ban foreign journalists. Listen to this statement. The Pacific is not the same as Australia or United States. When you choose to come to our Pacific Islands, be respectful, be courteous, and accord the appropriate protocols. The Prime Minister says the ABC program was racist, but the reporters deny this allegation. They're standing by their program. Manasseh Sogavare is exactly the kind of leader that China targets, willing to bend the rules, bold enough to challenge the West, yet gullible enough to believe China's lies. And he could be in power for much longer. The current parliamentary term ends in May 2023. But the Prime Minister wants to change it. He wants to extend his term at least until December next year. His strategy of playing the West against China is an old one, but such a strategy is supposed to benefit the people, not the Prime Minister and his party. Your beverage has just arrived and you're reaching out for sweeteners. There's sugar, both white and brown, and then there's artificial sweetener. If you're a health watcher, which one would you pick? I'm guessing the artificial sweetener. It helps you check your weight. It also keeps you away from diabetes, or so most of us have believed. Now a study says both these claims are false. Some artificial sweeteners increase the risk of diabetes. They also make you gain weight in the long run. I understand it's a bitter pill to swallow after all these years of picking artificial sweeteners as the healthy option. So let's deal with the basics first. What are artificial sweeteners? They are synthetic sugar substitutes. They do the job of sugar and they do it better. They're many times sweeter than sugar, which means you use very small amounts to get the desired sweetness. And that's not even the best part. Artificial sweeteners do not add to your calorie count. They have 0 calories. Sweet innovation, isn't it? People love artificial sweeteners. Their market size is more than $7 billion. By 2027, the number is expected to touch $9.7 billion. The market is booming courtesy increased awareness and health consciousness. Here's a study from 2017. It found that almost 42% of American adults consume artificial sweeteners. So do over 25% of American children. Given the study was conducted in 2017, you can safely assume the numbers have gone up. What about India? Here, artificial sweeteners are considered a luxury. One estimate says that only 2% of the mid-income groups consume them, as opposed to 70% of the high-income group. The sachets, however, are found in almost all upscale coffee shops and restaurants. You must have seen people carrying their own little boxes too. For years, these have been endorsed as a substitute for sugar. But here's the thing. What's calorie-free is not necessarily diabetes-free and fitness-friendly. You see, artificial sweeteners are essentially chemicals like saccharin and sucralose. Researchers studied them, and they tracked their effect on 120 healthy adults. You know what they found? Saccharin and sucralose affect a person's glucose tolerance. What is glucose tolerance? It is the body's ability to clear glucose from the bloodstream and then turn it into muscle and fat. Glucose intolerance is when your body is not able to do that job. When it fails to clear the glucose from your bloodstream, what happens next? There is an increase in the glucose levels in your blood, and that's what we call high blood sugar. Glucose intolerance can make you diabetic. It can also make you gain weight. So basically, artificial sweeteners create the very problems they promise to avoid. Now, you're free to write this study off, call it a one-off, or question its vested interests. You should always do that with studies. But I must also remind you that similar studies have been conducted in the past. Like this one from 2014, researchers exposed mice to artificial sweeteners. Guess what they found? Glucose intolerance and obesity. Another study in 2014 found that artificial sweeteners often prank our brains. Our brain ends up craving more junk. And like you all know, the more you consume junk, the more weight you put on, and the higher your risk of diabetes. Does this mean you stop consuming artificial sweeteners? Well, studies say you should. We say you must ask your doctor. Also, will stopping now reverse the damage done? On this count, we have good news. The answer is yes. Stopping artificial sweeteners, the use of them, can reverse the damage to your gut. In other words, you can act now. And before I begin the next story, I want you to watch a video and watch closely.
I would say, really, if you have a secure face and you walk in it, I feel that your life will be full of joy and peace and love. And I would really suggest that there's no other way. There's only one way. Walk in it and keep walking on.
This is Marina Smith. She's dead. But what you just saw was Marina Smith speaking at her own funeral. She also took questions from the mourners. The dead woman answered them at length, and none of it was recorded beforehand. Watch again.
How did becoming a grandparent change you?
Oh, I think it brought immense joy into my life.
So what just happened? This was artificial intelligence making an absolute mockery of the sanctity of death. This was artificial intelligence being creepy pro max.
I was at my funeral. I'm so pleased that I met so many good people who influenced my life, and I had a happy family life. I had a husband, and I feel my life was planned in there by the Almighty One. And I feel it's coming to conclusion under His guidance, because my work here is completed.
Marina Smith's son brought her back to life. He created this technology towards creating a digital clone of a living person and then asking her a series of questions. Based on her answers, AI is trained to interact on her behalf. Basically replace her in death. Marina Smith was one of the first ones to use her son's creations. This is her in January, 5 months before her death. She devoted 2 whole days to answering questions, all sorts of questions. She sat in front of a webcam, feeding the AI with important details about her life. Marina died in June. But then she returned to speak at her own funeral. The mourners were reportedly shocked. I wonder why. Look at them. They're watching and they're interacting with the woman they have just put to rest. Am I the only one who finds this creepy? This disturbing technology is now available for public use, which means the dead will soon frequently be speaking at their own funerals, which also means that some people will never get closure. If you've lost a loved one, you would agree with me when I say that one of the first stages of grief is denial. It is hard to come to terms with the fact that a living person is suddenly gone, that he or she is suddenly being spoken of in the past tense or is being called a body. It seems impossible to process this transition. So for the most part, we remain in denial. The problem with technologies like these is that they feed into that denial. They make you believe that the person is not really dead. Look, she's here. Look, she's talking to you, answering your questions. How could she be dead? Technologically, it's a remarkable feat. Full points for getting the dead to speak at their funeral. But what about those who are alive and those who are mourning the dead? What does it do to them? It throws their mental health off gear. It interferes with the process of grieving. It risks mental illness. And I will tell you why I say this. You see, while there is no timeline for grieving, it is a process that one must go through. They say it begins with anger, followed by denial, bouts of crying until you begin to move on and finally get a closure. But technologies like these may not let you get to that phase. A person may keep going back to their laptop and speaking with the dead. You must have heard of stories of people living with a dead body. We recently told you about one. A man from Thailand who lived with his dead wife's body for almost 2 decades. It's not normal. It's disturbing. And this isn't too different. Do you know what scares me? The technology we're calling creepy today is fast becoming the new normal. In 2020, AI reunited a mother with her dead daughter. This is Jang Ji-sung. She lost a 7-year-old daughter in 2016. The young girl had blood cancer. Years later, some documentary makers offered Ji-sung the opportunity to reunite with her daughter. Which mother would possibly say no? Jisung was asked to wear a pair of virtual reality glasses and see her daughter. The girl emerged from behind a pile of woods. "Mom, where have you been?" she asked. "I've missed you a lot. Have you missed me?"
어딨어? 엄마! 엄마! 엄마 어디 있었어? 엄마 항상 엄마 내 생각했어? 맨날 해. 아니 엄마 많이 보고 싶었어. 엄마도 너 보고 싶었어. 많이 잘 있었어? 나 예뻐? 예쁘지? 너무너무 예뻐 우리 나연이.
What was the point of this? What was the point of reopening old wounds, of bringing back old trauma? Do you think it will be easy for this mother to forget the experience, to move on from it? The documentary makers got what they wanted. The project became the talk of the town in South Korea. But the mother, for her, the cycle of grieving began all over again. Soon, Amazon too will be monetizing your grief. It is training Alexa to speak in the voice of your dead relatives. Amazon's top scientist spoke about this plan at a recent event. He even gave a little demo. A video was shown where a young boy's grandmom had died, leaving her reading of The Wizard of Oz unfinished. After her death, the grandson asked Alexa, "Can Grandma finish reading me The Wizard of Oz?" Here's what happened next.
Alexa, can Grandma finish reading me The Wizard of Oz?
Okay. But how about my courage? Asked the lion anxiously. You have plenty of courage, I am sure, answered Oz. All you need is confidence in yourself.
This is not only a mockery of death, but also of the loved ones the dead leave behind. This technology is playing pranks with people's emotions, tugging at your weakest strings. Do we really need these technologies? Must we really blur the line between life and death? Let me ask you a very simple question. Would you rather live in denial forever and let your life end with the death of a loved one? Or would you move on with fond memories of the time spent with that person? What do you think is the healthier thing to do? I think you have your answer. Don't let businesses tell you otherwise. Don't let businesses profit from your pain. I think that's a lot of food for thought. We're wrapping up the show, leaving you as always with Gravitas Images. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Vaya,